Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, I'm in education. I say good afternoon. You say good afternoon back. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. So I want to spend a couple of seconds talking to you about next generation models in education, but I think you need to understand the context of where we are today. There's only one message that I want you to take away from today. It is, remember that we're really always talking about one student. How do you get one student absolutely to where they need to be? You do that every single time, we have a successful education system. You don't, we fail. Each one matters. The president laid a goal out in a very simple way. It is that we want to be number one in the world again by 2020 in the number of citizens that actually complete their post-secondary degree of some form. We have fallen behind over the years, and actually that's a myth. We haven't fallen behind. Other countries are passing us by. There are several things that are in our way, though. 1.3 million. That's the number of students that every year stop out or drop out of high school so they don't actually graduate on time. 50%. Now, this is the real crime. There are kids who go to school every day, finish up, and wind up finding out that half of them are not ready for college-level work. Imagine that. You've done everything that you've asked. You've taken all the courses you thought you were supposed to take, and you get there and find out you're not ready. Now, people will give you lots of reasons for why this is. Investment in resources, et cetera, et cetera. I want to take one of them head on right now. We are now at 15.5 students per teacher in our system. That's, in 1970, just to give you a sense of it, it was 27 students per teacher. We're at 8.3 students per staff member, okay? We've increased our real spending since 1980 in education by 30%. Now, there's a whole other conversation to have about the fact that we've increased dramatically the number of people and only increased our spending by 30%, which means we traded off bodies for pay for some of the most important people in our workforce, our teachers. 0.1%. That is the improvement in our reading and math scores on the National Assessment NAEP since 1970. So we've made fairly significant investments in our system to very little benefit. Here's the good news, though. Every day, there are 3.2 million teachers out there who go in and give their best to our students, trying to help them succeed. And this is very, very important because ultimately it comes down to the interaction between the student and the teacher and what they can learn. And so the question is, how do we actually help them become effective? Well, the first thing that I want to say is that we're going to try something different this time. We're going to ask them. So right now, in partnership with the National Education Foundation, you've heard a lot about challenges today. The National Education Foundation is going to use our platform, innovation.ed.gov, to launch a challenge to educators across the country. First, to have them define what the biggest classroom challenges are that they have. They have to be able to attack those challenges for $1,000 or less. The community is going to then vet those challenges and say, what are the problems that we think we have in common that are the most important to go after? And then they're going to propose solutions. Because we have two challenges in education. One is coming up with the great ideas. The second is actually getting them deployed at scale. You oftentimes will walk into a school, anyone who's been in education for a period of time, and you'll see a great thing happening in the classroom. You'll see a teacher having tremendous impact with this group of students. And you'll walk down the hall and you'll see a similar group of students and nothing that looks the same is going on. And you'll wonder why. So this is not only to create great ideas, but to create community around finding solutions and taking them to scale. And I think it's notable that we're doing this in partnership with the union. There are other things, though, that have to happen in terms of changing the context so that actually innovation can start to happen much more rapidly in our country. Many folks have heard the latest conversations about the standards. If you don't know, up until most recently, states, and still to this day, have had 50 at least different state standards for their curriculum. What that means is that when people are developing solutions and innovations for education, they're shooting at multiple targets. The industry would say that they spend somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion a year on the customization alone just to meet the 50 different state standards. Imagine if that was invested in R&D and innovation. The second is that performance, actually how students do, is actually being injected for the first time, not only into how you evaluate programs and products, but actually how people are thought about as effective or ineffective. This is a new part of the conversation. In some ways, it's actually controversial. It surprises me that it is, but this is the case. We think that by actually putting how students do at the center of the conversation, we can have people drive much more effective innovations in the field. And then obviously evidence that things matter. Now here's where I want to start really talking about, once we have the basic system starting to move in the right direction, we know that we need much more radical transformation than we've had in the past. The good news is that we actually know it's already possible. 2 standard deviations. So there was a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Bloom, and he actually said, what are the limits that we know from what we do today of actually how we can improve on classroom instruction? And the reality is that we already know how to do it. Individual, one-on-one instruction, tutorial, leads to, in many cases, most cases, 2 standard deviations improvement over classroom instruction. So just to give you a sense of that, that means taking a student who's in the 50th percentile well into the 90th percentile. Okay? So the question is, we are now at a place where our productivity is 8 adults to 1. How do you get 1-to-1 productivity given the systems and resources that we have today? It's a very simple question. How do you get 10-fold improvement in the productivity of our current system? And what role does technology play in that? So I'm going to take us through this very quickly, because the world has changed fairly dramatically, and you'll hear from other people who can actually lay this out even better than I can. But the combination of low-cost devices, ubiquitous broadband, and cloud computing are finally making it possible for technology to actually be pervasive in classrooms. We now are at the place where the technological requirement is not that great, and you can actually afford to give each kid their own device. Once we have the connectivity, we're in business. Second, massive data mining. Why is this important? Well, if you said, how do we figure out what students need to know and be able to do, and what are the most efficient pathways for students to learn today? How does that happen? It typically happens like this. We get a bunch of great teachers and a bunch of great educators and researchers. We put them in a room and they lay out stickies to figure out what the learning progression is for students on a given subject area. And then they fiddle around until they all agree, and that's it. That is the learning progression, and the courses and everything are organized around that. Why should that be the case? That ought to be the starting point. We now have the ability to collect information on what kind of students, what exercises students are doing, how well they do them, what things they understood first, what things they understood second, which, after you have enough data, which students actually understood which things in which order, in which ways, with which kind of teaching modalities, how are they best served. You can glean all of that now from the data. There's no longer the need for us to try and do this through our own suppositions about what students do. Because we can tell from our history, we actually don't know. Adaptive algorithms. We now have the ability, as you know, through all of your daily experiences, to deeply personalize experiences. This is the same in learning as well. The assessments, the information, the resources that you're most interested in, that you'd like to see, that you need to see at a given point in time, we now have the ability to dynamically adjust these algorithms so you can get exactly what you need when you need it, as never before. Peers and experts and social networks. We know that we actually need to use those in ways. That's the way in which we can actually dramatically reduce the ratio to get it to be truly one-on-one, so that in fact we can deliver to students that 2 standard deviations experience. True one-on-one learning. That is the next generation of learning. Thank you.